Hey guys, today I want to touch on a slightly different topic. Usually I talk about the operations of how you can improve your Shopify store and go very deep into that. However, today I want to discuss how much is your Shopify store worth, and is there actually a very data-driven way we can determine how much your store is worth? There's, I think, a lot of BS talk on this topic, to be honest, but I just want to present you with the data and then you can essentially make your own conclusions. And that's really, any Shopify store, for example, some of the stores I've talked about in my portfolio that make, let's say, 200-300K a month in revenue. But even if you're making 10, 20, 30, 40K in revenue per month, all the way up to, tens of millions, how much is your Shopify store worth? I do want to focus on the smaller size segment since that's what I'm most familiar with. And also, that's where I have the cleanest data, believe it or not, which I'll present to you in this video. But of course, I think the best way to actually understand the valuation of your store is to find relevant and real comparisons of actual previous sales that have happened to similar stores in your niche and your size segment. And the question is, can we actually find a distribution of all those sales and actually have a very clear picture of the data? And the answer is yes. We have actually scraped all the store sales over the last year on two of the biggest exchanges that exist for e-commerce brands. That is Shopify Exchange Marketplace, which as of very recently actually has been shut down by Shopify, which was quite an interesting move, and we'll talk about that as well. And Flippa, which I think now is the biggest biggest marketplace for you to sell your e-commerce store and your Shopify store specifically. Before, I think it was Shopify Exchange. In any case, we've scraped both of them and we've plotted every single sale that has happened. Not sale technically, but every single listing that has been on those platforms, and we've mapped them out on this beautiful chart showing you asking price versus monthly revenue. And the platforms themselves will never show you this data. They don't want you to see the entire distribution because it essentially provides a lot of information that goes against the price discovery on those platforms. But in any case, I think this data is very valuable for you to actually start to understand how much your store is worth. I'll talk you through my thoughts on what those valuations mean, on what you can expect for your stores, and I actually go and show you some examples. So let's jump straight in. All right, guys. So how much is your Shopify store worth? First of all, I don't want this to be some theoretical kind of MBA bullshit on valuations. We can obviously talk until we're blue in our face in terms of all the different factors that go into evaluation. I love those discussions, but I think here I want to be actually a bit more practical and actually show you real data. And as I mentioned, I think a great way for you to actually start understanding how much your Shopify store is worth, and getting away from all the theories out there of what it might be worth, is actually looking on stores that are actually currently listed and are actually selling, that are real comparables to your Shopify store, right? They're in the same niche, they're in the same size segment, they're all on Shopify, they have similar KPIs, similar financials in terms of revenue, profit, retention, conversion funnel, average order value, etc. We'll go through some of the main KPIs, and you can start making a very clear picture. Obviously, those comparables change over time, and that's completely fine. But ultimately, on the most fundamental level, your Shopify store is worth what someone's actually willing to pay you for it. Not to sound too obvious here, but I think that's the first point I'll make, is that I'll try my best not to just say theoretically your store can be worth infinite amounts because it's such a great store, but there's very concrete data that can back this up. Also, to just set the scene, right, I said already in the intro, we scraped two of the biggest platforms. So that is both Shopify Exchange and Flippa. Shopify Exchange is no more longer available. That is, to be honest, I think quite a shock in the community, because I think it was the biggest exchange, obviously, for people to buy and sell Shopify stores. I think personally a bit strange that Shopify decided to shut down that part of the division. Obviously, they're in cost-cutting mode, as many businesses are at the moment, as of the time of making this video. And I guess they weren't profitable there or whatnot. But I think it's still valuable data, because this was the biggest exchange of people buying and selling Shopify stores. Obviously, Shopify had access to all of your financial data. They could show that immediately on the listing for buyers to look at. They wouldn't, however, provide you this macro distribution. You would actually have to go listing by listing. If you've ever were on any of those websites, you just like kind of go store by store, and then you look at some of the KPIs that they put here, right? Obviously, if you plot everything on one graph, and we can kind of zoom out here, this is an interactive graph where we're using log scales. So beware, because the stuff changes pretty fast here. Every dot here, hopefully this was already pretty obvious from the beginning, is a store that was actually listed on the Shopify Exchange marketplace. And if you press on any one of those dots, you can see the rough revenue history. You can see the description. So for example, here the brand sells high quality branded skincare tools and serums, blah, 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 blah. We have a plan to move to a subscription model. There's a link that now isn't available anymore, unfortunately, but it'll still make the point. This is a private listing, so here we would not see the name of the store anyway, but we see that this store makes on average a monthly revenue of 21K, a monthly profit of 3.7K, and they are asking for a asking price of 75K. So they want to sell it for a price of 75K. Now, first thing I want to point out is obviously asking price does not equal selling price, right? Asking price is what the buyer sees. The negotiation starts, and the final selling price could be lower or higher than the asking price, depending obviously on how the negotiations go. Still, I think it's very valuable because that's obviously what the seller is demanding, and they also adjust those prices given how badly they want to sell, and also the competition, right? Ultimately, the demand and supply in the market, right? And those prices do adjust over time. I think they do offer some sort of benchmark that we can use to actually make some conclusions. So the way I personally like looking at this is in terms of multiples on profit. Again, the profit here. So what we need to watch out for is that the revenue here is literally revenue pulled from the Shopify backend, right? So if you list your Shopify store on the Shopify Exchange Marketplace, Shopify sees your revenue and they automatically don't even have the option to opt out. You have to be public and transparent about your entire revenue history, right? Shopify will see your revenue history, right, throughout your entire, through the entire existence of your store, and they will publish it on the exchange, right? You can select to be a private store. All that's going to do is essentially what I never share the name of my stores or the products we sell because that gets abused. And similarly for the exchange marketplace, you can also decide to create a private listing, essentially where the URL will not be shown until essentially a buyer contacts you privately. There's like always a messaging thing, and then you can then decide to share that information with a potential buyer if you wish to. Anyway, the profit, so the point I was actually making is that the profit is actually then stated by the store owner who is creating this listing, right? We cannot trust the profit figures fully. This is an estimate by the store owner, whereas the revenue figures are real. I usually conservatively just assume a profit figure, a profit margin of 10%. Why 10% is because I think a lot of the profit figures are completely inflated. I did a separate video on profitability where I asked, are you really profitable? But are you really, really profitable? If you're all alone in the room and you have no one else around you and you don't need to convince anyone of how profitable your store is, are you really profitable? And the answer is you're probably less profitable than you think you are or than you want to be. And that's relatable. But the point is that especially when people create those listings and they're able to put their own profit figures there, those figures are overstated. 10% is my assumption because it's most stores, especially the ones that are making hundreds of thousands per month on average, so are already hitting the millions a year. They obviously have to be profitable for the most part because those stores are not like VC backed or anything like this, right? Those are actual businesses that need to be profitable to operate. They will die very quickly if they're not profitable, and that's why there needs to be some minimum profit margin, right? Of I would say 5 to 10%, right? I think stores that have below a 5% margin are not going to scale to the hundreds of thousands per month, right? Because that's just too cutting edge of them actually burning money, right? And then stores that I think the minimum is really 10%, where stores are able to reach some sort of scale sustainably and hover around that, right? And it's essentially, so that's the assumption I use. It's the lower of the 10%, or if they actually some of them are honest about their profit figures and put a figure below the 10% margin, and I'll just use the lower of the two, right? So if they actually say, look, I have a 3% profit margin, it's complete shit, that I will trust them if they're kind of being honest. Although at that point they might even have a negative margin. It happens, obviously. With so many stores, you'll have some very interesting exceptions, but keep that in mind. So here, I would actually assume that they're actually making only 2.1K in profit, not the 3.7K, and they're asking for 75K. So let's quickly whip out the calculator and do some quick calculations. So if we do 75 divided by 2.1, that's 2.1. So 2.1, this is 2.1 per month, right? So if we do 2.1, so I always calculate the multiples on a yearly basis. Again, it's just how you want to do it. So that means they're making a profit of 25K. Exactly. So that's a multiple of 3. I think multiple of 3 is quite expensive. So to cut to the chase, a lot of the stores we see in the size range between a 1 to 3x net profit multiple, meaning that if you make $100,000 in profit per year, you will typically list from anywhere from 100,000 to 300,000, and I think most stores are in that range. What obviously a few factors that determine then where in this range you are, right? And of course there's so many, and ultimately, of course, it depends on how desperate you might also be or not in selling your store, right? Obviously, I think the correct term is motivated seller, right? If you're very motivated, then you're willing to take a hit in terms of valuation, and that will also speed up the process of you being able to sell your store. And also, of course, macro environment, the other competition, specifically in your niche, right? And so on and so forth, right? So we can look at a few examples. Here's another store making 35K revenue per month, 7K profit, right? Which, again, is a 20% margin almost. I don't believe that. I think this is completely overpriced. So I wouldn't look into that too much. You can see the revenue history. We actually internally, this is a completely internal thing we've done. We have a health tier that we essentially attribute to each store from 1 to 4. And that's a further calculation that we do in terms of how healthy we think the store is. But in any case, that's something we just decided to do. And here you can see actually some of the stores and even their names, monthly profit, monthly revenue, blah, blah, blah. So I think this is a pretty big store. But you see, there's also stores that just die out and they have no consistency. So obviously you need to look at the history. And that is, of course, I think, going to the main KPIs of what creates a valuation, higher, lower in that range. And of course, you can also be outside of that range, depending on how aggressive those factors are. Is one, how long your store has been around. Pretty obvious, right? If you're only around for 3 months, there's not much track record that you can show, even if you're growing like this. But 3 months is usually not enough. I think stores can start demanding on Shopify, again, for this size range, and I'm really focusing on this. I'm not talking about public companies here, right? Shopify stores that are, have at least two to 3 years in history can already start demanding a premium just because they can show that track record across several different cycles, seasonalities, quarters, so on and so forth, especially now with COVID and beyond COVID. People want to see if there's any COVID inflation or not, right? So that's obviously one key factor, is how long the store has been around. The other is obviously the customer returning rate, the retention rate, or the churn, if you will. Of course, this is influenced if you're a subscription product or not. But even if you're not a subscription product, right? So I've made this comparison previously. You can see, for example, this store that I talk about quite often has a returning customer rate of only 2.47%. Again, this is just a given month, so we can go into the next month. Let's see if this changes. Obviously, those numbers fluctuate from month to month, so it did change quite a bit in terms of percentage terms, but obviously not that much in absolute terms. So, and here this month we actually made quite a bit less in revenue. So, if you look at the returning customer rate and compare this, for example, to this store, where the returning customer rate is 55% instead of 4%, then obviously, so importantly, both of those stores are not subscription products. So we're comparing apples to apples. We're not doing oranges to apples. This is obviously a massive difference in returning customer rate, right? And of course, this store can argue for a premium in terms of that multiple because of their higher returning customer rate. So you know that every customer you acquire, again, given how the business is running now, more than half of them come back the next month, right? So this is obviously this rate is higher if essentially you select different time periods. Another thing is obviously the conversion rate funnel. Here you can see a pretty healthy conversion rate funnel where even if we go on, let's also just play around with a few months here and there. Here you can see that. Here you can see actually a very, very solid conversion rate funnel. I'll have separate videos on that as well. We have, it's actually, the add to carts are even not that high. 10% is not bad, but obviously we're converting more than 5% of all visitors into actual sales, right? If you compare it again to this store, it's 1.91%, which is obviously a huge difference. I think this is still healthy. But of course, again, there's so many things that come into it, and I'll not touch on specific products, right? Obviously, then you have the whole topic of like how defensible your product is. Can you really build a moat around it, like more general business things, right? Can you actually sustainably operate this business? How much room for improvement is there in certain pillars? And there's all those considerations, which again, I won't be able to touch all in one video. And again, in many other videos, I talk about certain aspects of it in terms of how you can improve it for your own store in any case. But of course, your funnel will also be a function of your average order value, right? If you're selling something way more expensive, then of course, less people will convert. All other variables kept constant, right? Because you're obviously selling something for $180, which isn't that cheap actually for e-commerce. Where again, it's also not that expensive, but definitely it's above, let's say, like the average of like 50, 60, $70 that so many products fall under that category, right? So of course you have those KPIs, right? And many more, but I think I touched on some of the important ones. And the point is that you can then select the industry that you're in. So for example, you're in pets and animals, right? Then you have a slightly different distribution potentially than if you're electronics and gadgets. It's also a very popular niche. You might be in construction, industrial, probably not. Automotive, yeah, also not that common. Health and beauty is a very common one, right? So you can see this is actually very, very, very common. Anyway, take a look, and I think comment below if you agree with those valuations and those listing prices. I'll quickly touch on Flippa. Flippa is the other big platform that you should be keeping an eye out. Let me go to Flippa Scatterplot. I actually have their website here. So if you go to Flippa, number one marketplace to buy and sell e-commerce stores. There we go. And you can see that they don't only do e-commerce stores. So if you go under websites, you can buy and sell all kinds of online businesses. I think their biggest sections are still under e-commerce. And obviously under e-commerce, you have Shopify and Dropship. To be honest, most of Dropship is under Shopify, so I'm not quite sure what they distinguish between the two. But anyway, to be honest, I didn't go onto this website for a while. You obviously have Amazon FBA, which overlaps a lot with some e-commerce brands that obviously do both. And you have some digital products and inventory holding. Not quite sure what inventory holding is. But anyway, if you go to Shopify, you'll then get all the listings one by one. Again, no one's gonna like scrape and display this information beautifully for you, but that's what we have here. So again, let's go to log. So what I actually found interesting with Flippa is, I also have categories here. You can see like the right-hand side, there's like a bit more, I would say like a market efficiency kicking in. Actually, I think this is pretty interesting, where you just have people who are hesitant to ask a lot more beyond this line. If you would just draw like a line here, right, where like let's take a store that's right on the verge. We see, okay, it's making 1.9 million in annual revenues. The monthly profit is 160K, which again, I would be very skeptical about. This sounds like, this is a year. Exactly. Okay, then, so this is a year and this is a month. So yeah, then that's, I think, completely overinflated, I would argue straight away. And they're asking for 8 million, right? Which is already quite a 8 million. Okay, keep in mind that here, if we're already beyond this 1 million, because this is a log chart, you can change to a linear scale. I prefer log chart because you can see all the distribution on straight away. With the linear, you need to move around much more. So just keep in mind that that kind of tricked us a little bit, that 8 million is just slightly above 1 million on this chart, because obviously you go by multiples of 10. But in any case, it's a very similar picture in terms of the overall distribution, right? And again, you can get the sense of this if you obviously scroll through Flippa yourself. They give you actually the multiple. You see 1x multiple, 2.7 profit. Again, I'll be very careful with the profit figures. and you can you can find your most relevant comparable yourself, and then start determining the price that you can use to also maybe start making some sort of transferable case for your store because you have similar KPIs and all. Anyway, so this was a quick introduction to some of the valuation infographics, I guess, that we have here, and some of the thoughts that I have just looking around at some of the smaller stores. If you want to sell your store or are thinking of buying a store, reach out. I'm happy to discuss those types of topics. I really love those types of topics. So also feel free to comment below and tell me your thoughts. And see you in the next video. Hey, before you bounce, consider subscribing to our channel, but only if you've actually enjoyed the video and found at least a few valuable things for your Shopify store. Also, check out our free Shopify app, Trackidex. We have a link in the description below. We're developing new features literally every day, and we're also excited to actually hear your feedback on some of the next features we should develop. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.